Well, hi, welcome to week 5 of our series on Solomon. I am Pastor Jim, and we're really happy you're here. Hey, before I do anything else, I just want to say what an amazing report these kids just gave. Was that incredible or what? Wow, I was thrilled by that. Well, way to go. Really well done. Yeah. I mean, Keenan, that was some good, great stuff, really funny, and I guess, as you probably know, Asia, you got some real talent. I'm sure others have told you that. I mean, that was really good. It was okay in the first service, but you were just kind of practicing. You were really rocking this, and this is really cool. Excellent. I think Jamie and Talita are the finest youth leaders in the whole world, and I've seen a lot of them, and we are really thankful for them, so well done. Great. Well, today I want to begin by warning you about a serious illness that is rampant in Dubai. Alan and I constantly worry that we're going to catch this, or perhaps we've already contracted it. And I'm sure in a crowd this size, and certainly those of you watching online, I'm sure there are many people who have this disease. Some of you may just be carriers, meaning you're not showing the outward symptoms, but you're passing it on to others, because this is a highly contagious disease. As a matter of fact, some entire families have contracted it, and some have even had to leave Dubai because of it. And the disease I'm talking about is not SARS or MERS or hepatitis or measles or anything like that. The disease I'm talking about is the disease of greed. Do you have greed? Someone in your family have greed? You know someone has a greed? It really is a worldwide epidemic, to be honest with you. It's not just here in Dubai. It's in every country, every city, every culture, isn't it? Isn't that true? I mean, it's in your home country, no doubt. It certainly is in mine. But I do believe that perhaps it may be more prevalent here in Dubai than most any place else I've ever seen it. I think with all of our, platinum this and gold that and VIP here and, buy the latest and the newest and, the exotic cars. How about that? I mean, every time I drive, I just am blown away by these cars that just cost literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dirhams. I just can't believe it. And the thing that really got me, I think, when I came the first time, when I first hadn't been here long, and I realized that they auctioned, for hundreds of thousands of dirhams, they auctioned off license plates. Can you get over that? I mean, I saw recently someone paid 100,000 dirhams for a particular number. I mean, I guess now Pastor Warwick can park wherever he wants, but still, that seems a little out of hand, huh? Don't you think? I mean, 100,000 dirhams, Warwick, come on, give me a break. At any rate, I jest, but this is really no laughing matter. It really isn't. What are the symptoms of the disease of greed? It's this: love of money. Do you love money? Do you crave it? The desire to be rich if you're not rich. How about a lust for things? What does greed look like? Well, let me show you a couple of pictures I came across the internet. Maybe you'll recognize something that reminds you of yourself. Huh? Does that ring a bell? How about this one? Saw a guy in an elevator do justice the other day. I thought, wow, that's really weird. This is really what it looks like. We dress it up. We call it by fancy names, like consumerism and marketing and all this stuff, but this is really what it looks like. How about this little guy? Don't you love this? Got all the cookies there in one big pile. Huh? Anybody here see this when they look in the mirror? This is terrible, isn't it? You got so much stuff, they can't even get it in their house. They have to cram it in their garage. That's just pitiful. That's what that is. And it starts real early, doesn't it? In a lot of us. This little girl's got the look already. Don't touch my dollies. They're all mine. We try to hide it, but in reality, it's as though it were literally written on our face. It's so prevalent. It's so predominant in us. And even though we may laugh when we think about it, in reality, the truth is greed will destroy us. That's what the Bible says. It will destroy our marriages, it will destroy our children, destroy our relationships, it will destroy our health, our minds, it will even destroy our own souls. I guess that's why, realizing that it's such a pandemic among humanity throughout all time, Jesus warned us about it so often in the New Testament. It was one of the main things that he cautioned us against. For example, in Luke chapter 12, look what Jesus says. Jesus said to them all, beware and be on your guard. Interesting two words here. The word beware, phulasso. It's a word which is a military term. It literally means to be on sentry duty. to be on guard duty because you're in battle. So it's this great sense of intensity. And then he uses this other word, a Greek word, which means, it's translated here as be on your guard, but it literally means to stare at something, not to take your eyes off. It's kind of the idea that you're backing away from like a rattlesnake and, you're watching it closely for what it's going to do. And whenever Jesus wanted to emphasize something, you do that in Greek, since there was no punctuation in Koine Greek. You repeated yourself. You emphasized it by repetition. Jesus is saying, beware and don't take your eyes off this thing. That's how dangerous it is. Guard against every form of greed. How many forms of greed are there? Do you know? Have you ever thought about that? And there's just greed, just plain old greed, I guess. But there are other forms of greed, aren't there? How about materialism? That's a form of greed. That's the love of what? The love of things. The riches is another form. That's what the Bible calls it. That means the love of money. There's, of course, coveting. That's the love of what? Of what someone else has. Doesn't matter how much you have. Ooh, that's nice. I'd like that too. There's, let's see, what other forms are there? There's gambling. That's the love of risk. There's get rich quick. That's the love of getting that which you did not earn. There's the greed that's a form of, it's called hoarding, which is the love of having what others do not and feeling like I got it all. There are many, many forms of greed. What kind do you suffer from? Jesus said, be careful about every form of greed, because not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of possessions. And then Jesus tells, as always, this great story. It's one you may have heard before, but it bears listening to again. Jesus said, once upon a time, there was a rich man who had a land which bore him many good crops. I mean, he was just a bumper crop. And so what did the man do? Jesus said, and the man said to himself, what shall I do with these crops? Because I have no place to put them, my crops. I know what I shall do. I shall tear down my barns, and I shall build bigger ones. And I shall take my crops, and I will put them in my barns. And then I will say to myself, relax. You have much laid up for many years. Sit back, eat, drink, and be merry. Now, I don't know if you picked it up on that, but in those three verses 17, 18, and 19 of Luke 12, Jesus used I or my 11 times in three verses. 11 times. I, my, I. He's making a point, wasn't he? I mean, it sounds just as silly in Greek as it does in English. But Jesus is like, Jesus, can you be a little more obvious? Well, what's the point? Greed is all about who? Number one. It's all about what I want, what I'm interested in, what I like, what pleases me. I want everything that I want, and I want it now. And so how did he conclude the story? But God said to the farmer, to the man with the crops, you fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you've prepared, whose will they be? So is everyone who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. Let me ask you a real serious question, talking about serious. Is your life in Dubai more about being rich toward God or about loving the things of earth? Which is it? Apparently, according to what Jesus says here, you can't do both. One or the other. He said in a couple of places, no one can serve two masters. Either you will love the one and hate the other, or vice versa. Either you will love God or you will love money. You can't love both. That's the disease of greed. So what do we do about it? Well, that's what we want to talk about this morning. And one good bit of news is that we have a perfect case study. I mean, we've got absolute poster child of wealth and greed, and his name is Solomon. King Solomon, if you haven't been with us the last few weeks, lived about 1,000 years before Christ. He was the greatest king by human measure that Israel ever had. But he had three great seeds of self-destruction. You know what they were? Number one were women. He married foreign wives in abundance. We're going to talk about that here in a few weeks. We've just mentioned it or alluded to it before. The problem was, of course, not marrying women from another country or culture or race. Nothing wrong with that. The problem was they were women who did not believe in the God of the Old Testament. And as a result, they brought their foreign religions with them, and it absolutely destroyed Jerusalem, Judea, and eventually Solomon actually split the country in two. Number two is wisdom. We saw last week, if you were here, Solomon he was given an opportunity to ask for anything he wanted. What did he ask for? He said, God, give me an understanding heart that I might rule your people the way you would. He was wanting God's wisdom, and so God gave it to him. As a matter of fact, he made him the wisest man in the whole world. People would come far and wide to hear his wisdom. We talked about some examples of it last week. But the amazing thing was, even though he accumulated all of this wisdom, he did not apply it to his own life. Isn't that sad? How many of us know a whole lot more than we're doing? Easy to condemn Solomon, but how many of us are just filled with all kinds of answers, yet our lives reflect all kinds of failure? And then last of all, wealth, the third thing, the third seed. He accumulated extravagant riches, became, some would say distracted, others would say consumed, but ultimately the problem was the riches revealed Solomon's heart, and his heart was divided. And the older he grew, it became darker. Matter of fact, have you ever seen this thing where they talk about the hearts of the kings of the first three kings of Israel? Have you ever seen this? It's a really cool little study. Let me show you what I'm talking about. The hearts of the first three kings were first Saul was the first king, and he did badly. Then he was replaced by David, completely different family, and then David's son, Solomon. And it's fascinating because it says in Proverbs 17, written by Solomon, I might say, the crucible for silver, the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the heart. And King Saul, he had no heart for God. If you read 1 Samuel, when he was made king, he was like LeBron James. I mean, he was the LeBron James of the Hebrews back then. He was like head and shoulders, literally, that's what it says, head and shoulders taller than anyone else. I mean, he was buff, tough. I mean, he was like, we need a king. Whoa, look at that guy. He'd make a good king, you know. I'd follow him in battle, you know, that kind of thing. And so, but from the standpoint of his heart for God, it just wasn't there. And it wasn't, he had the opportunity. God even blessed him with the ability to prophesy with some of the prophets. He was right on the verge of making a good move towards God, and then he just backed away and went someplace else. King David, what did he have? He had a whole heart for God. It says that repeatedly in the Bible. The problem was he made some bad mistakes, and that's why his heart is splotchy. Got some real stains on it. The good news is that every time David made a mistake, he always repented of it and returned to God. Why? Because ultimately, his whole heart was the Lord's. And then finally, we have King Solomon, the one we're talking about today. What was his problem? He had a divided heart for God. By the way, it's a cool slide. By the way, thanks to Ruby on our church staff for putting that together. It's so cool looking. I almost hate to leave it and talk about anything else. I just want to look at it, admire it. I'm greedy about my slide. At any rate, you get the point. This is a tragic thing that happened in Solomon's life. He started out so well. Yet he ended up so badly. Why? Because he didn't love God with all his heart. Let me ask you a question. Where's your heart? I once heard it said that every person in the world can be divided into these three categories in their relationship to God. Either they have no heart, a divided heart, or a whole heart. Question is, where is your heart? So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to talk about three things. Solomon's great wealth, how his wealth affected them, and finally, hopefully we'll get some help with this problem of greed and materialism. We'll talk about how we can be content in Dubai, which is the real antidote for the problem. Let's start by taking a look at Solomon's wealth. And here's the point we want to make here. Listen to this. Solomon became unbelievably wealthy, beyond anything I think we can almost even imagine by today's standards. I mean, maybe you'd have to go back to the Gilded Age of the robber barons and the first super wealthy people who were just wealthy beyond what we can imagine. Solomon would be somewhere in that category. And the thing is that if Solomon could have all of that wealth, all of that power, and yet he could not find happiness with it, why are we thinking if we have more, are going to be happy? Because that's the great lie of greed. More will make me happy. No, it won't. That's a lie. It won't make you happy. And Solomon will show us that. First of all, Solomon was extremely wealthy because he had a vast kingdom, a kingdom that came as a result of God's promise. It says in 1 Kings 4, verse 20, Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. In other words, their population had exploded because of the peace and no war. And they were eating and drinking and rejoicing. Man, everybody's having a good time. This is early on in Solomon's reign. And Solomon ruled over the kingdoms from the great river, that's the Euphrates, to the land of the Philistines, to the border of Egypt. And they brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Here's a map that shows you how vast was Solomon's kingdom. Larger than any time the Israel was before, after. I mean, this was the zenith. This was the pinnacle. From the Nile to the Euphrates, this is what the kingdom. And it wasn't they owned all this land, but they basically were the most powerful country, and these were vassal states around them. And the amazing thing is that God had promised Abram 1,500 years earlier that this is exactly what would happen. Abram, who was Abraham because of his great faith, God came to him and said, listen, one day I'm going to make a covenant with you. One day your descendants will rule this whole area, this vast area. Even though right then they just had a little tiny piece of land, hardly more than Abram was standing on. But Abram had faith and he believed God. To me, it's an amazing prophecy that came true. That's one of the great convincers of me that the Bible is God's word as opposed to some other book, is because the Bible is full of statements that we know were made at an earlier time. I mean, that was Abraham, 1,500 years before Solomon. Here it is finally coming true in Solomon's day. Who could ever have guessed that would have happened? Remarkable thing. But it enabled Solomon to become super wealthy. We know that for one reason because it says in 1 Kings 4, just the food that he ate. I mean, it's ridiculous. If you go to 1 Kings 4, 22 and 23, it talks about how they had, every day, they had bushels and amazing amounts of food. They had like 10 oxen and dozens of sheep. And I mean, literally you could feed an army. I guess to give him some credence, there was a lot of courtiers who were with him, eventually his 300 wives and 700 mistresses. That's a lot of kids, you got to feed. And then you've got, army people and governors and other people and hangers-on and servants and all that. That's a lot of food. Still, if you compare what you read in 1 Kings 4 about all the food they ate, and it goes on for quite a long ways, to what other kings of his day were doing, Solomon was way beyond them. Not only that, but he had other resources. He had thousands of horses and a fleet of ships which sailed vast distances in order to bring riches back. One particular trip, they brought back the equivalent of like $23 million in gold. Absolutely, almost $1 billion in gold. Now, notice what it says about his horses. Now, Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Just stop and think about that for a minute. I mean, most chariots took 3 horses to pull. So that's another, 3 times 4. That's another 4,000 horses. 4,000, 12,000, each of those are cavalrymen has a horse. That's 16,000 horses Solomon had. That's a lot of horses. I mean, that's more than His Highness Sheikh Mohammed has. I mean, come on. You're talking wealth now. I think I heard sometime I was on a tour of the stables, and I think the guy there said they think that Sheikh Mohammed has about 1,000 horses. And he's pretty well off, Sheikh Mohammed is. This guy, way beyond that. Incredible how much he had. And he stationed them in chariot cities, and with the king in Jerusalem, he had so many, he couldn't put them all in one place. Some of us who've been to Israel here a few months ago, we actually saw one of the stables from Solomon's time, a vast stable where they kept the horses. And Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Q. You know where Q is? It's in modern-day Turkey. At that time was the Hittite Empire. So the Egyptians and the Hittites and king's merchants procured them from Q for a price. A chariot was imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, a horse for 150, and by the same means they exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and to the kings of the Arameans. What was Solomon doing? He was an arms merchant. Are you kidding me? These horses are for war. This is not for parades. And chariots. This is for battle. So he was arming all these other kings. Our arms merchants make a lot of money. Solomon just had it rolling in. You understand? That's the point. Absolutely incredible. How about his actual treasury itself? Most historians believe that Solomon was one of the wealthiest human beings who ever lived in all of history. I mean, that's pretty significant. As a matter of fact, he was a trillionaire before the word even got invented. Yeah, that's pretty good when you can be something, there's not even a word for it. I'm so rich, I don't know what to call myself. I'm that rich. Yeah. So, and that was not a Donald Trump impersonation, by the way. I just want you to know that. 1 Kings 10, now the weight of gold which came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Besides that from traders and the wares of the merchants and all the kings of the Arabs and the governors of the country. I mean, he's just got stuff coming in so fast, they can hardly build buildings to keep it. How much is 666 talents of gold? That's 25 tons of gold. A talent is like 33 kilos, and so that's about 75 pounds per talent. And so you add that up, that's 25 tons of gold, which would be like $1 billion today in today's money. Think about that, $1 billion US. And how long was he king? 40 years. And this was coming in $1 billion a year and more. Do you understand the incredible wealth that Solomon had? Absolutely unbelievable. 40 years at $1 billion plus other income. That's enough to go shopping anywhere in Dubai he wants to go. Okay? You know what I hate? I hate when I go to the mall, like Mall of the Emirates, and I'll be walking along and I see those stores with the doors closed, and they got the guy that's kind of guarding them, at the door, and he's looking at you like, you don't belong in here. Go on by. No, I mean, he just looks you over, just like, no, go down to Carrefour. No, next. I mean, that really, I've told Alanda, I just want to go get a tuxedo on and get her like really dressed to the nines and just, go walk in, excuse us, we're coming in, and go, you just pick this stuff up and go, is this all you have? Man, come on, honey, let's go see if we can find a nicer store. And I just want to do that one time, just to kind of get back. I'm that kind of guy. See, this is the struggles I have, okay? You know who I am. Anyway, Solomon could have shopped in any store he wanted. They'd have opened the store for Solomon, all right, in the middle of the night. This is who Solomon was. Incredible wealth beyond anything I think most of us can even picture or imagine. Now, how did Solomon's wealth affect him? That's the question. And I'll be honest with you, and of course there are Bible students who conclude that there's, maybe we shouldn't go here, but I believe that there's enough evidence to say what we're saying today, is that Solomon's wealth affected him badly. And even though there's no verse that specifically says it, there's a lot of things in the Old Testament that we just read about that just happen and God doesn't necessarily evaluate, but we can tell, what's being said. And so I believe that we have proof in the scriptures that Solomon's wealth contributed to the self-destruction of his life. So let me show you what I mean that. First of all, Solomon had excessive spending. I mean, shields of gold and ivory and a gold throne. Let me show you what I'm talking about. 2 Chronicles 9 says, and King Solomon made 200 large seals of beaten gold, using 600 shekels of beaten gold for each shield. You know what he's talking about? He's talking about large shield. It's a shield that you took into battle, which was as tall as a man. And that's made of solid gold. Now, you couldn't carry a shield like that in battle. It would be way too heavy. This is just decoration. He's spending money on wall decorations. Can you believe this? And then he made 300 shields of beaten gold, using 300 shekels of gold on each shield. That would be a smaller, round shield. And what did he do? And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. He just put them on the walls of this place. You estimate, you figure that up, you know what that is? That's about 12 tons of gold on the wall, just to decorate the place. I hope none of you have that on your place, okay? If you do, I'm coming over and getting some of that. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory. I mean, that alone, to make a throne out of ivory, you can imagine how much ivory it took. And then he overlaid it with pure gold. Oh, give me a break. There were 6 steps to the throne and a footstool in gold attached to the throne, and the arms of each side of the seat, and 2 lions standing beside them, all gold. 12 lions were standing there on 6 steps on one side and on the other. Nothing like it was made for any other kingdom, I guess not. I mean, what did it look like? Well, there's a famous painting by Sir Edwin Poynter, the great English painter, and it's called, it's when the Queen of Sheba comes to visit Solomon, which we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks. You don't want to miss that. But here's the Queen of Sheba. She's arriving, and here is Poynter, who actually used Kings, what we just read, as a guide. Here he painted this incredible throne. See, here's the solid gold lions here, and then back here, there is a throne made of pure ivory overlaid with gold. Absolutely unbelievable. And the reason I especially wanted to show you this is I wanted to show you this picture. You know what this is? This is a throne made of ivory also from the Phoenician Empire, not far from where Solomon was. And it dates to about the same period, about the 8th century before Christ. As a matter of fact, it was actually written about in Phoenician literature. And it was admired as being so beautiful and exquisite. And yet look at it compared to Solomon's throne. Do you see the difference? Is somebody shopping at the expensive stores or not? I mean, this is beyond reason. It's extravagance beyond comprehension. And not only did he have it just to sit on, he ate off of it. Everything he ate off of was solid gold. And King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and the vessels in the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Silver was not even considered valuable. Solomon said, silver, get that out of here. That's what I want. That's trash. We'll use it for paving, later. Get it out of here. The king made silver as common as stones in Jerusalem. And he made cedars, those huge, massive cedar trees. You ever been to Lebanon and smelled the beautiful cedar forests? Oh, they just take your breath away. And some of them are just towering. He literally brought a lot of those big, huge trees back. And they were as plentiful as sycamore trees. Matter of fact, you see where it says there, the house of the forest of Lebanon? Have you ever heard of that before? You know what that is? According to 1 Kings 7, Solomon had so much money and so much time on his hand that not only did he build the temple, which took 7 years, not only did he build one of the biggest palaces in the ancient world, which took 13 years, he then built a third building, which we know very little about, and we really don't know what its purpose was. Bible scholars have argued about it for years, and he called it the house of the forest of Lebanon. It was what today would be 4 stories high, and if you took a 15-story building and laid it on its side, that's how long it was. And it was filled with 45 massive cedar pillars, so that when you entered the building, it smelled like you were in a forest of cedar. And there was gold and precious jewels inlaid into the walls. It was absolutely ridiculously gaudy. I think it was probably like a materialist, apparently he greeted people there. I don't know, maybe he went over there and, just walked around and smelled. I don't know what he did, but it was apparently just because he could do it that he did it. That, I think, is extravagant. Wouldn't you agree? I think so. But here's the thing that really bothers me, too, is that he lost touch with people suffering. In the beginning, we read about how Solomon seems to be much more caring about the people. And there's one particular verse there in 1 Kings 4 that talks about how the people all sat under their own vine and drank and ate. So there's a sense that everybody is cared for and everybody's got enough to live on. But over time, the richer Solomon got and the greater his need became for riches to satisfy that craving, he began to lose touch. Look at this. This is in 1 Kings 12. Now, Solomon has just died, and his son Rehoboam is about to take over. And there's another guy who was a servant of Solomon's named Jeroboam, a high servant. He's the guy, by the way, who's going to rebel, break off from Rehoboam and go form the northern nation of Israel with 10 tribes. But this is why. And so they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, the guy who was Solomon's son, saying, your father made our yoke hard. Now, therefore, lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke, which he put on us, and we will serve you. So what's he saying? They're saying, listen, we had it tough under your dad. There were heavy taxes. We paid so much. It's time for lightening the load a little bit. Unfortunately, Rehoboam is going to follow in the footsteps of his father. He's going to say, you think Solomon taxed you? I'm going to tax you a lot more than he did. And that's what eventually caused the rebellion. What a heartbreaking thing Solomon did in that, to teach his son that that's the way a king should rule. Excessive, extravagant, uncaring. And now, most of all, this is the thing that I think is the coup de grace. Solomon blatantly disobeyed God's commands about kings. One of the things God had Moses do, again, 450 years before Solomon and David, was to write in the book of Deuteronomy a short passage that describes what kings could and couldn't do. Because even kings are supposed to be under the law of God. Notice what he wrote. When you enter the land, and the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me. You shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your countrymen. So there's 4 things that every king has to meet. One, he has to be a Hebrew, has to be from their countrymen. You shall set a king over you. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not a countryman. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself. Well, let's see. How many horses did Solomon have? I can't remember. Oh, yeah, he had a lot. Nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply the horses. Where was it he was getting those horses? Do you remember? We talked about this a minute ago. Since the Lord has said to each of you, you shall never again return that way, never go back to Egypt. He shall not multiply wives for himself. Does that ring a bell? Maybe not. Maybe it's just me. Or else his heart will turn away. Nor shall he greatly increase silver or gold for himself. I mean, 4 things. Solomon only qualifies for 1, and that's because he was born that way. 3 things. He broke them all. And this is the thing that's most amazing. You think Solomon knew about this? I think he probably did. Look at this. Now it shall come about when the king sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll in the presence of the priest. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by carefully observing all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment. What did Solomon's riches do? They spoiled him, as riches so often do. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we ought to live in poverty. Who wants to not have enough comfort? Who wants to not have enough food? Who wants to not have a clean place to live and clothes to wear and transportation and a good job? But why, listen to me, why are we all so crazy about getting so rich when so often the riches just harden our hearts and turn us away from God? Why? Why do we want that so badly? Solomon made a huge, huge mistake with his riches. So, how do you be content? How can we be content and guard against this thing of greed? How can we keep from falling prey to what's happening all around us here in Dubai? Well, contentment is the antidote of greed. Let me show you 3 things. This, by the way, all come from a talk I heard years ago by Pastor Rick Warren. I think there were actually 6 things, but we didn't have time, so I just boiled it down to the 3 most important. So here are 3 ways that you practically can help yourself to guard against greed. Are you ready? So you might want to read these, maybe take a picture with your phone, put them in your head, not to forget. Okay? I hope so. Number 1, we need to stop comparing ourselves with others, especially those who have more than we do. I mean, is that a practice that we all go about or what? I don't know why we never look at people who have less than we do. That would really help us. That would soften our hearts. Instead, we want to constantly look at the lifestyle of, the rich and famous. We want to, get on the internet and go to the websites. We want to see what the Kardashians are doing. And, we're really into that. And it's really important to us, what rock star just bought, what island. That's really cool. Why do we do that? I don't know. It just seems to be part of this disease of greed that we all have. Pastor Rick says, God made us unique, and so his will for us is unique. If we look at other people and think that we need to live that way, that's not God's will for us. I've always thought that the Lord has, someone once told me, the Lord will give you just as much money as you can handle and not $1 more. And I think one of the reasons the Lord didn't make me something, He made me a pastor. Don't get me wrong, I'm very comfortable. This church blesses Alana and I. We're fine, but believe me, we're not rich. We don't have a house in the U.S. We don't have a retirement. I'm gonna work until I die. That's just what I'm gonna do. But I like that. That's fine. I needed that. God knew that I didn't need a lot of money because all it would have done was harden my heart. So God gives us, I believe, what we need. Now, doesn't mean is it wrong to be ambitious or to try and get more education or to advance yourself, to get a better job, a better standard of living, get enough money so you can bring your family here? Absolutely not. It's fine to do that. The question is, where is your heart? Where is your heart? Why are you doing that? Another thing he says is comparing ourselves to others is a sin which opens us up to many other sins and temptations. This comparison thing is really serious now. We've got to stop it. It's going to destroy us if we don't. Because we look and we lust and we crave, and then that affects how we think about life and how we live. Look what it says in 2 Corinthians 10. Paul's actually, this context, Paul's talking about the comparison of comparing he as an apostle to some other men, but it can be applied to what we're talking about. Not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, but when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. Comparing yourself to somebody can mess with your head so that you don't think straight. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Exodus 20, one of the 10 commandments. You shall not what? Covet your neighbor's house. You shall not what? Covet your neighbor's wife or anything else he has. Quit looking at what you don't have. Look at what you do have. Look at those who have less than you do, not at those who have more than you do. Simple way to break this disease of greed. A second thing, focus on enjoying what we have and who we are in Christ. Focus on what we have already and take delight in that. Take pleasure in what God has given you. Yeah, it may not be as much as the next guy, but I guarantee you it's a whole lot less than other people may have. And be thrilled that you have it. And enjoy it and use it to God's pleasure. Many of us are so busy trying to get more, we fail to enjoy what we have. Another thing he said I realized, we can't enjoy what we have because we are always at work trying to pay for more things we can't use. I thought that was a lot funnier than you thought it was. I thought that was really hilarious. I think maybe we stepped on some toes there. Listen, I realize we all have to work long hours in Dubai. That's just the way Dubai is. I mean, you can either that or you can lose your job. But the question is, what do you do with the money you earn? What do you do when you come home? How are you working to make sure that your life is not about possessions? It's not about getting rich. It's about doing something meaningful with your life. Being involved in serving and helping and serving God, working in the church, whatever the case may be. Look at this, 1 Timothy 6. Teach those who are rich in this world. Now stop just a minute. Who is Paul addressing this to? Well, he's clearly talking to the people who live in Emerald Hills. I mean, it's not me. I live in the Springs. It's not me. He's talking to those people who shop in those stores that I can't get in. That's exactly what he's talking about. I'm going to go by and watch them come out and go, hey, Paul's got some things to say to you that you can listen to. No, listen, he's talking to us. Did you know that? Every person in this room. Did you have something to eat today before you came? Or will you eat today? At least one meal? Well, then he's talking to you. Look at these statistics. These are saying, if you have any coins in your pocket right now, reach in your pocket. You have any coins in your pocket or in your pocketbook? Or maybe you have coins back where you live? If you do, you are wealthier than 80% of the population, much less any folding money you have, much less any bank account you have or a credit card. You're wealthier than 80% of the population. Look at this. If you have one other blouse or one other shirt besides the one you're wearing, you're wealthier than 95% of the world's population. Do you realize that? I mean, we don't want to say it because we always want to look up. None of us want to look down. If you have a refrigerator where you live, you're in the top 2% of the wealthiest people in the world. Just two statistics for the United Nations. Incredible, huh? One of the reasons I'm so happy that our teams went to Romania and they were able to meet and spend time with gypsy kids and underprivileged kids and orphans and other people is that was a great wake-up call to that's how so much of the world lives. And what we live here in Dubai is an aberration. Now, some of you, I know that really well. You come from countries or backgrounds or homes where, you came to Dubai to just live because you couldn't live where you were, and you're away from your family, and, your income is a small percentage of what the income of many people in this room is. I realize that. And for you, this is particularly hard because it's really easy when you're sitting in an air-conditioned villa, with 2 bedrooms and 2 cars in the garage to think, yeah, people need to be more content. But I promise you, God is saying to all of us, I have a plan for your life. I'm going to bless you. And what you need to do is to realize that right now I've given you this, and in time, be faithful to me, I will give you more. I believe that's what he's saying. But this is not just a sermon to fill a day. Solomon's life has given us an opportunity to talk about something that touches each one of us and our children every single day here in Dubai. Listen to what he goes on to say. For those of you who are rich in this world, that's us, don't be proud. Don't put your trust in money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God. You know what he's saying here? He's basically saying you can be rich and still not be greedy. 4 things that make you that way. Number 1, you what? Don't put your trust in money. Their trust should be in God. Hope in him, not in these things. Emergency happens, who's the first person you call? Your banker, your accountant, your prayer partner, your pastor? Simple question. Tell them to use their money to do good. What percentage of your money is invested in helping people who can't do anything back for you? I mean, orphanages, other ministries, labor camp ministries, the Red Crescent. What are you doing with your funds? Are you helping people? Number 3, they should be rich in good works and generous to those in need. 3rd criteria, giving. How much do you give? I mean, just give away. Every day, every week, we who are rich should be giving something away to someone who doesn't have as much as we have. By doing this, you will be storing up treasures as a good foundation for the future so that you may experience what? True life. You want blessings? You want happiness? You want a loving marriage, a great family? You want health, you want long life. It won't always happen, but generally God's saying, my hand of blessing will be on you if you live with your money this way. That's a really insightful passage. The secret of contentment is not what I have, but whose I am. I love this verse. Keep yourself free from the love of money and be content. How? How? By doing this. By saying, remember what Jesus said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. That's what gives my heart blessing. It's not one more package from Tiffany's. That's not it. Also, it's wonderful. He says, Psalm 17:15. This is one we should all memorize. But as for me, my contentment is not in wealth, but in seeing you and knowing all is well between us. And when I awake in heaven, I will be fully satisfied, for I will see you face to face. Wow. Now that is the secret of contentment right there. So last thing, third thing. Remember, life is not about who has the most things. You've probably heard this before. Never judge your self-worth by your net worth. Never think your value is related to your valuables. Our purpose in life is not about how big our pile is at the end. That's not the solution. The answer is what? Proverbs 30. This is not the words of Solomon. It's actually the prayer of a man named Agur. It's called the prayer of Agur, A-U-G-U-R. 2 things I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep deception and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but feed me on the food that is my portion, that I may be full, that I may not be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or that I may not be in want and steal and profane the name of God. Isn't that a great prayer? That's a great prayer for Dubai. Give me just what you want me to have, Lord. Help me to be content with it, and help me not to be covetous or jealous of what others have. Help me to look at those who are in need below me and share generously what I have. That's a great, great prayer. You know, there's a famous story that the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy wrote. Let me share this with you and I'll be done. Tolstoy was an interesting writer, and he wrote this story that's entitled, How Much Land Does a Man Need? And it's a very simple story. It's the story of a peasant by the name of Poem. And Poem is a tenant farmer. He has no land, and he's working for a wealthy lady. And day after day, year after year, he's plowing her fields, and he comes home every night thinking the same thing. How I wish I had my own land. How I wish I had some land. If I only had a little piece of land, I would be happy. I would be content. And finally, one day, the lady dies, and some of her land is sold off. And so he takes everything that he and his wife have been able to save, and he goes and he purchased this tiny little piece of land for them to live on. Now, he's still plowing someone else's fields, but at least when he comes home at night, it's his hearth. It's his house. And he's so happy, and things go on for several years, and everything's fine. And then one day, a traveler comes through, and he tells Poem about this far distant land where there's vast pieces of land that they're selling, large tracts of land, to anyone who wants to buy it for 1,000 rubles. So Poem talks to his wife. She says, no, we have enough here. We're content here. We're safe here. God has given us this. We should be happy. But Poem says, no, we need more. And finally, he decides, he tells her, we're going to sell what we have, everything we own. We're going to take our children, and we're going to journey to this far land to get this land. And so he does. And sure enough, when he gets there, here's the land agent, and he tells Poem, it's absolutely 1,000 rubles. You can have as much land as you want. Here's the way it's decided. You take a stake, and you drive it in the ground at sunrise. And then you can begin to walk. And you can walk as far as you want. And then you drive another stake. And when you have to come back, and you have to get back to the original stake before sunset, and all the distance that you have traveled in your walk is your land for 1,000 rubles. Whether you walk a short distance or a long distance, doesn't matter. 1,000 rubles, it's yours. Well, Poem knows he's in good shape. He's a fireman after all. You know, he's very fit. So he decides, I'm going to get plenty of land. So the day comes. He can't wait for the sun to break the horizon. He pounds the stake. Off he goes, and he begins to walk and walk and walk. But the problem is, he walks too far. And he keeps seeing good pieces of land. He doesn't want to stop. He sees streams and water. Finally, he realizes the sun's beginning to sink. He drives a stake, and he rushes to get back. And here's what Leo Tolstoy wrote. What shall I do? Poem thought again. I have grasped too much and ruined the whole affair. His shirt was soaked, his mouth parched, his breast was working like a blacksmith's bellows, heart beating like a hammer. Though afraid of death, he could not stop. After having run all the way, they will call me a fool if I stop now. Darkness was coming, but the men on the hill were higher. They could still see the sun. So they urged him on. With all his remaining strength, he rushed on, bending his body forward so that his legs would hardly follow fast enough to keep him from falling. And just as he reached the hill, suddenly it grew dark. And he rushed ahead, and he fell, and he reached the starting point with his hand. "Oh, that's a fine fellow," exclaimed the owner. "You have gained much land." And Pahom's friend came running up and tries to raise him, but then he saw that blood was flowing from Pahom's mouth because Pahom was dead. And he picked up the spade and he dug a grave that was long enough for Pahom to lie in, and he buried him in it. 6 feet from his head to his heels was all the land he needed. And then Tolstoy adds this, Proverbs 1. "So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owners." There's a prayer I'm going to pray. Maybe it would help you to pray it too. Would you bow your heads with me? Dear God, I've been a fool and believed that having more would make me happier. I've been busy trying to get more that I failed to enjoy what I already have and be thankful for it. You have given me so much: food to eat, clothes to wear, place to sleep. Forgive me for comparing myself to others. Forgive me for coveting. Help me to find my security and happiness in you. Deliver me from greed and materialism. Help me to be rich in doing good and to be generous. Lord, only by your strength can I do these things. Help make me a new person in Jesus. In his name, amen.